Welcome back to iRich History. Theodore W. Golden, a former soldier of the 7th Cavalry, carried a secret. As one of the last men to see General Custer alive, his personal testimony is a rare and valuable historical account. In 1904, he shared his recollections in a letter, one that we will explore today. But before we begin, please remember to like and subscribe to help grow our community. I received your letters of July 28th and August 2nd, asking for some of my own experiences and what I knew about General Custer's final battle. The many years since that event may have dimmed certain aspects of my memory, and the limited time I have forces me to offer a somewhat fragmented narrative. Still, I've read your publications on the subject with great interest, and am pleased to hear they will soon appear in book form. In answer to your question, I was fortunate to know General Custer from the moment I joined the regiment in 1873 until his untimely death. I served with him and the regiment on campaign, except in 1875 when my troop was posted in the southern states. In the spring of 1876, we learned that a major expedition against the Sioux was being organized, 3 large columns in all. A few weeks later, orders arrived for us to march, and our battalion moved from near Shreveport, Louisiana, to Fort Lincoln in the Dakota Territory. When we arrived, General Custer was still in Washington giving testimony before an inquiry committee, and he joined the regiment only days before our column departed. He had been placed under arrest in Chicago while traveling from Washington, so I will skip the details of our march from Fort Lincoln to the Yellowstone, which we reached near the mouth of the Powder River. There we stayed for several days preparing our pack train, as it had been decided to leave our wagons behind and establish a supply camp. Major Reno had gone out on a reconnaissance a few days earlier, intending to rejoin us near the mouth of the Tongue River on June 17th. After final preparations to leave our wagon train, dismounted recruits, and regimental band at Powder River, we moved to the mouth of the Tongue, making camp on June 17th. The same day, General Crook fought a fierce battle with the Indians on the Rosebud. All day long, we watched every rising dust cloud in the distance, hoping it marked Reno's return. But hearing nothing, we broke camp on the morning of the 18th and moved up the valley, finally meeting Reno shortly after noon. It was clear that something in General Custer had changed. He seemed sullen, dissatisfied, and not quite himself, tense and unsettled. But when Reno delivered his report, Custer's usual energy returned at once. His old determination showed itself as he quickly formed the command and set out for the Rosebud, where General Terry had already gone ahead aboard the steamer Far West to meet General Gibbon's nearby column. We marched far into the night before finally reaching the Yellowstone, where we camped, confident that if the steamer was downstream, we would meet it. The next morning, we moved out early and soon saw General Gibbon's wagon train followed by the Far West coming upriver. Messengers were sent to inform them of Reno's discovery of a large Indian trail. Not long after, we camped near the mouth of the Rosebud, where a council of war was held to fully examine Reno's findings. The next day, detailed plans were made for the campaign. A final council took place aboard the steamer on the night of June 21st, during which General Custer received his final instructions, mostly as you have previously described. As the council ended, General Gibbon was asked when he could arrive at the mouth of the Little Bighorn. He replied, "Not before noon on the 26th. At that meeting, it was said that Custer had been offered the 2nd Cavalry Battalion and the artillery brought on the steamer, but he refused both, saying he trusted the speed and ability of his own command and worried that artillery might slow movement near the enemy. Many believed this was part of his effort to secure an independent command, something he had been accustomed to in earlier years. In the end, his wish was granted. On the afternoon of June 22nd, we paraded before Generals Terry and Gibbon, and soon after set out on the trail Reno had identified. From that point forward, we followed the trail steadily until Reno located the Indian village, departing from it only when necessary to find suitable camps. Against orders, no attempt was made to scout the country around us or to send word back to General Gibbon, even though Scout George Herendeen had been assigned to our column for exactly that purpose. Our marches were long and rapid until the night of the 24th, when we left the trail as though stopping for the night. But it was a ruse to mislead the Indians. We had been told to remain saddled and ready for a night march. From the moment we left the Rosebud, Custer's manner changed yet again. His old energy returned, and he seemed wholly focused on locating and fighting the Indians. It is important to note that the trail we followed came from the direction of the Missouri River, and, according to Bloody Knife and our Crow Scouts, belonged to about 1,000 to 1,200 Indians who had come from the Missouri River agencies, almost all of them warriors. Around 11 p.m., orders came to saddle up and form a line. Meanwhile, a scouting party made up of Crows, Reese, and several officers, including Lieutenants Varnum and Hare, had gone ahead to cross the divide and locate the village. Leaving our bivouac, we pushed along the trail intending to cross the divide and reach the foothills of the Little Bighorn before sunrise. But the rough ground and difficulty following the trail slowed us, and dawn found us in a ravine beneath high bluffs, uncertain of how far we were from the river. During the night, word came that Custer had ridden ahead to join the scouts, and just after sunrise they reported that they had found the village in the valley of the Little Bighorn. Custer was said to have doubted their claim. At the same time, it became clear that our presence had been detected. An ammunition box, actually filled with hardtack, had been lost, and a detachment sent to retrieve it found Indians attempting to open it. When this was reported, Custer appeared to decide on an immediate advance. As the command was being divided, Mitch Boyer, the mixed-blood Crow interpreter, warned Custer that he would find more Indians in the valley than he could handle with his force. Custer asked him whether he was afraid to go. Boyer replied he would follow Custer anywhere, but warned that if they entered the valley, neither of them would come out alive. Just before the advance began, Lieutenant McIntosh instructed me to report to General Custer for duty as an orderly, and I did so at once. Custer told me to ride with Lieutenant Cook, the adjutant, and follow any instructions he gave. During our brief halt, the men lay on the ground, most asleep, while the horses fed among the sagebrush. Custer ordered the advance, directing that the company and battalion ready first should take the right of the line. Within minutes, we were mounted. Orders had been given for Benteen to move left to scout the country, drive any Indians before him, and send word of anything he discovered. Reno was to follow the trail, while Custer, leading 5 troops, moved to the right, leaving McDougal with the pack train to follow as best he could. We set out accordingly. After half an hour of difficult riding, the rough ground forced Custer to turn left, and we soon came upon Reno's column climbing ahead as fast as the terrain allowed. After a hard ascent, we reached the top of the ridge and saw a rolling plateau sloping toward the river's foothills 5 or 6 miles away. Reno's column moved rapidly along the trail ahead of us, while Benteen's force was visible several miles to our left, scouting the bluffs. We followed Reno's general path, but kept to his right. To those near him, Custer seemed impatient with our pace. He would ride ahead at a gallop, stop, wait for the column, then rush forward again. Soon we saw a great dust cloud moving down the valley, but could not determine its cause. Custer, accompanied only by his orderly trumpeter, rode toward the river and stopped on a high point. We saw him wave his hat as though signaling to someone in the distance. He then returned to the head of the column, where Captain Keogh and I Company, veterans of many fights, led the way. With brightened eyes, Custer told Keogh, "Those Indians are running. If we can keep up the chase, we can afford to lose half the horses in the command." Keogh turned calmly in his saddle, looked at the long line of eager men behind him, and replied, "General, we will do all that man and horse can do." Moments later, the bugles sounded the charge, the first since leaving the Rosebud, and we swept northward, trying repeatedly to descend into the valley, but failing each time. After perhaps the 3rd attempt failed, Custer spoke briefly with Cook, who quickly wrote a note, folded it, and called for an orderly. I reached him first, and he handed me the message. "Deliver this to Major Reno. Remain with him until we join, then report to me at once." Then he was gone. A moment later, the rear of the column thundered past and disappeared into the ravines. I watched them vanish, then realized I was alone in a hostile country. I headed toward Reno, guided by the rising dust over his position. Only a few long-range shots were directed at me, which made me press my horse faster. After a 6-mile ride, I reached Reno as he dismounted to fight on foot. I delivered the message, its contents unknown to me. Reno glanced at it and put it in his pocket. Just then, the Scouts panicked and fled, not stopping until they reached the wagon train back at Powder River. The Indians soon worked around our flanks and began closing in behind us. We had to turn and push back their advance until we reached the timber. Several horses were shot, others bolted. Once in the timber with better cover, we resumed fighting. Protected by the trees and the riverbank, we were able to hold out briefly. Soon we saw Captain Moylan preparing his troop for action. Lieutenant Wallace, nearby on the skirmish line, called Captain French, who commanded the center company, asking about orders. French replied he had received none, but would inquire. Moments later, he shouted that he understood a charge was imminent, though no clear instructions had arrived. He proposed we mount and support it. When we prepared to mount, we discovered about 15 men had lost their horses, shot or scattered. Lieutenant McIntosh had lost his horse and took one belonging to Trooper McCormick, who said sorrowfully that we were doomed anyway, and he might as well die on foot as on horseback. As we mounted and rode out of the timber, we were stunned to see that instead of charging the Indians, Reno was leading a rapid retreat toward the bluffs on the opposite side of the river. The Indians quickly closed in on our flanks and fired heavily into the retreating column. Fortunately, their aim was poor, and our losses were relatively light, though the withdrawal became a chaotic rush. It is often claimed that Reno became so excited that he emptied his revolver and threw it away. I can state that this is false. The revolver in question later belonged to General Benteen or his family, and was still accounted for years later. During the retreat, I was riding on the left side of the column near the timber when my horse suddenly fell, throwing me into the sagebrush. I escaped with only minor injuries. As I got up, Lieutenant Wallace rode past, calling out that my horse was down and urging me to run for the timber. I did not stop to check for myself, but followed his advice. With only brief pauses, I reached the timber safely. From my hiding place, I saw our men pushing their horses into the river, forcing them through the rocky water. I watched Lieutenant Hodgson's horse leap into the stream and saw Hodgson struggling as though wounded. He freed himself from the stirrups and held on to a trooper's stirrup strap, crossing with difficulty. Once on the far bank, it was clear he had indeed been hit, but continued valiantly. The trooper tried to help him mount, but dared not stop his horse. A moment later, Hodgson seemed to be struck again, lost his grip, and fell. He rose unsteadily and tried to reach the ravine where the command was disappearing, but collapsed again. Realizing escape was impossible, he turned, drew his revolver, and faced the Indians. Moments later, several shots rang out from my side of the river, and he fell. I knew his fate was sealed. As our men reached the bluffs, I found myself alone, pondering my own chances. But I remained unnoticed, as the Indians were occupied stripping and mutilating the dead along the riverbank. Around this time, I heard distant heavy firing downriver and assumed Custer was engaged. From the glimpses I'd had of the enormous village, I feared he was as heavily outnumbered as we had been. Most of the Indians near us suddenly mounted and raced to join the fight at the lower end of the village. I spotted Scout George Herendeen and called to him. We joined, and he told me the 15 dismounted men had made it to a position about 200 yards away in the timber. They had attempted to cross the open ground to reach the river, but had been driven back by fire. Before leaving, the Indians set the river bottom ablaze, either to conceal their movements or to flush out our wounded. The smoke, however, became our salvation, allowing us to reach the river unnoticed. We crossed with some difficulty and encountered a Crow scout who directed us to the rest of our command, which we soon reached. When we rejoined the force, we found that Benteen had arrived, but there was still no word of Custer. We reported all we had witnessed. Not long after, a white flag appeared from the river bottom, near where Herendeen and I had hidden. Lieutenant Hare bravely crawled to a lookout point on the bluffs to signal to them that we were friendly. They crossed cautiously and turned out to be the dismounted men left behind during Reno's retreat. During the retreat earlier, I had seen Lieutenant McIntosh riding some distance ahead of me on McCormick's horse. His lariat had come loose and was dragging, with the picket pin bouncing dangerously through the brush. Several men called warnings, but he seemed not to hear. His horse soon fell. Whether he was shot or simply thrown, I did not know, but when I passed him, he lay motionless. We found him in the same spot the next day after the Indians withdrew, and it appeared he had died there. As I stood on the bluffs overlooking the valley, I heard an angry exchange. Captain Weir shouted, "By God, if you won't go, I will, and if we ever get out of this, someone will answer for it." He strode off, and soon I saw D Troop mount and move toward the distant firing. Without official orders, the entire command followed, except Benteen's and Godfrey's troops, which retained some formation. We went down the valley until we met Weir's troop falling back, overwhelmed by a far larger Indian force. We formed a line and held off the pursuing warriors until Weir's men passed through and reformed behind us. Together, we withdrew again. As we continued falling back, Colonel Benteen, who now seemed in command, turned to Lieutenant Wallace and said, "Wallace, there's no point retreating farther. Form your troop with your right secured here. We'll make a stand." Wallace smiled faintly and said, "I have no troop, only 2 men." Benteen laughed grimly. "Form yourself and your 2 men, and I'll explain our situation once I understand it myself." That small group formed the center of our defensive line. Others joined, and we took cover behind sagebrush, building rough barricades and opening fire. We held the Indians at bay until nightfall finally brought relief. During the night, we shifted position, set up a corral and hospital, and dug in as best we could. At dawn, the battle resumed, continuing without pause until about 3 p.m., when the Indians suddenly began striking their lodges, packing their travois, and moving up the valley, sadly out of rifle range. Twice that afternoon, volunteer parties went for water, drawing fire both times. Madden of K Troop was struck on the second attempt, suffering grievous leg wounds that required amputation that night. The next day, Generals Terry and Gibbon arrived, bringing relief and news of our comrades in Custer's battalion. On the 28th, after ferrying our wounded across the river, we moved to the battlefield and buried the remains of Custer's men. With few exceptions, including Custer himself, the bodies showed signs of mutilation. As I recall, however, Custer's own remains bore no such marks. Given the space, I will not go into additional details of the battle, as your article has already described them sufficiently. In speaking with various officers and frontier veterans, the general opinion was that 3 main factors led to the disaster. First, dividing the command into 4 separate columns 15 miles from the battlefield without precise knowledge of the enemy's size or location left us fatally unsupported. Second, Custer's premature arrival, nearly 24 hours ahead of the planned time, proved disastrous. Third, the loss of horses and extra ammunition severely reduced our effectiveness. As more qualified men have already studied this subject thoroughly, I won't add further. My experiences with General Custer made me see him as fearlessly brave, sometimes dangerously so, inclined to take chances without fully weighing the odds. I have always thought that one possible reason for his decisions, despite his orders, may have been the lasting sting of what he viewed as the President's unjust treatment of him. He may have sought to restore his reputation with a bold victory like that at the Washita, reclaiming his place as a leading Indian fighter in the public eye. Whatever his motives, we must acknowledge that he fought courageously and ultimately died with the comrades who had ridden with him to victory many times before. Very truly yours, Theo W. Golden. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more video like this on American history.